indicate what has happened in the Parliament just a few minutes ago. And what occurred was that a bill that has been before the Parliament for a very, very long time. In fact, in various incarnations, the bill has been before the Parliament since 1999. I indicated that in my statement to the Parliament that the gambling betting control legislation has been in the Parliament since 1999, and there were 4 attempts by the previous administration, the UNC administration, to pass this legislation. The bill lapsed in all of them. And when we came in 2016, what we decided to do was to lay the bill word for word in identical form as to what had been dealt with by the previous administration in 2015. And here's some information I'd like to put into the record. The debate on the gambling control bill commenced in the House of Representatives. 22nd of May 2015, it was piloted by the then Minister of Finance, Mr. Larry Kawai, and the persons who spoke were Mr. Kadies, Mr. Indar Singh, Mr. Ramadar Singh, Dr. Ramadar Singh, Dr. Munilal. And the bill went to committee, amendments were made, and it was then put to the vote by the former government, the former UNC government, and there were 26 votes for, none against, no abstentions. You may recall around that time they had, I think they had suspended Dr. Rowley from the House. But the UNC went ahead and debated this legislation and passed it unanimously. All 26 members of the UNC present voting for it. The bill then went to the Senate on the 2nd of June. Again, it was piloted by the then Minister of Finance, Mr. Hawaii, and a number of senators commented on it, and then Parliament was dissolved shortly thereafter, causing the legislation to lapse. But the most important point, the point I wish to make, is that the bill that we introduced, that I introduced in 2016 in July, was exactly the same bill that had been passed by the UNC in the House of Representatives on the 27th of May 2015, where all of them voted for it. We had a lot of resistance when we came with the same bill, the same UNC bill, a lot of objections. This is the point I just made in the Parliament. What I thought important to do is to read out the contribution of the Member of Parliament for Oropouche East, Dr. Munilal, in May 2015. And he had quite a long contribution, and this is how he ended his contribution. Before the break, I sought to link the developments today with the government's very bold and courageous initiative to legislate this sector. He was talking on the Gambling Control Bill 2015, exact same bill that I laid in 2016, and regulate and monitor the sector to prevent the abuse of the vulnerable. These are the points I made today. To detect crime that is related, a lot of white-collar crime that is related to this sector. I made this point in the House today. To protect the vulnerable, and of course to ensure fair treatment for the customers and patrons in this sector. So these are some of the points that I made today in winding up the debate on the committee report on this bill. Exactly the same thing. And we need to legislate this sector, we need to deal with white-collar crime, abuse of the vulnerable. Dr. Munilal went on to say in May 2015, these initiatives are done within the overall framework of our strategy to diversify the economy, create various pillars of wealth and income redistribution, so that the economy is on a firm footing as we diversify away from the gas and energy sector. And he ended by saying, I am convinced, this is Munilal speaking, that with this legislation in place, we will have a vibrant sector with sufficient income and employment generation and wealth circulation throughout the island of Trinidad and Tobago, typo on his part, and ensure that we have economic growth because of this strategy, and that we can be proud today that we could bring a bill, pass a bill that will bring regulation to an unregulated sector for far too long. May 27, 2015, those were the words of Dr. Mulila then. What we did, since we didn't want to get into any argument, the bill requires a 3/5 majority. So it requires the votes of the opposition. So what we did, seeing that they had brought the bill and they had all voted for it and they had passed it in the House and they had taken it to the Senate in its same form, and because the Parliament was dissolved in 2015, the bill could not reach conclusion. What we did is I laid the bill exactly the same bill that was passed by the UNC, all of the members voting for it, word for word in the House, and surprise, surprise, the bill requires a special majority. So that the same special majority bill that they passed, using their 26 votes in 2015, they then said they want the bill to go to a joint select committee. Same bill that they passed 1 year before. We had no choice because it requires a special majority. So we took it to a committee. And in 2016, from 2016 to 2019, July 2016 to November 2019, we worked with the opposition UNC to address any concerns they might have had with respect to the legislation. First thing they asked for is consultation, but we couldn't understand that because they had consulted before they passed the same bill in 2015. But again, we had no choice. We need a special majority and need their votes. We don't have 26 votes. So we went along. We spent 3 years working with them, session after session after session, discussion after discussion, hours and hours and hours of committee meetings. We interrogated and interviewed and sought feedback from every single stakeholder in the industry, all the private members clubs, all of the authorities that deal with taxation and financial intelligence and so on, the makers of the machines, the gambling machines, the importers, everybody involved in the sector. Listened to them, gave them all the documentation. We gave them the regulations, the proposed draft regulations, because this was a point that was raised by the opposition saying that there were no regulations. That proved to be untrue because the UNC cabinet in March of 2015, before they tabled and debated this same bill in May of 2015, had approved the regulations for every single aspect of the gambling sector as companion documents to the bill. So then when they made these, I have to call it spurious objections, as we went through this long 3-year process, they said there are no regulations. They then produced their own regulations that they had approved, that they had drafted. Those were then submitted to stakeholders in March of 2017. And we received feedback from every single stakeholder right through 2017 into 2018 on the regulations and the bill. The opposition then demanded that we bring in expert consultants. We did a worldwide search and we found experts in Australia and in England, world experts. We had to go and check their bona fides to determine whether they had a conflict of interest. We did all that. And then we spent a whole year with these consultants going through the clauses in the bill and going through every single regulation. We completed the bill and there was no objection from members of the opposition in the Joint Select Committee, no objection during that whole 3-year period where we went through extensive consultation. And we reached the end and I prepared the report and they were given ample time to look at it, no objection. So we come now to debate the committee report and immediately the same people who were in the committee started to raise questions that had been raised in committee a year before and addressed to their satisfaction. So it became obvious to us that notwithstanding the fact we had been working with them for 3.5 years on this legislation, it was the same legislation that they had laid and passed in the bill, passed in the House in 2015, that they didn't want to support it. So they just dragged the whole process out. And what we decided that, we can't wait any longer with this matter, so we decided to put it to the vote today. What they did today was they abstained. They have absolutely no good reason to abstain. I made the point that the member for Oropouche East, whose Hansard I just read out, supported the legislation in 2015, their own UNC legislation, said how proud he was of it in 2015. He came with a ridiculous claim in 2020 when we debated this thing. Where are the regulations? And I had to show him the regulations produced by his own government in March 2015 and show that these were all the product was his own government. That was his objection, no regulations. And then, which was obviously not true. That was a ridiculous objection. And then the other persons, Mr. Indar Singh and so on, started to nitpick over words that had been subjected to intense examination for 3 years and had been dealt with to his satisfaction. So that it's clear to us in the government that the persons involved in this industry clearly have lobbied the opposition, and notwithstanding the fact it was a UNC bill, UNC regulations, it's clear that they have been got to, and it is clear that for whatever reason, they have decided that they are no longer going to support the much needed and long overdue regulation of a $16 billion industry where there's known white-collar criminal activity, where there is suspicion of money laundering, where there's leakage of foreign exchange, where there's exploitation of workers, especially single mothers and so on. For some reason, the UNC has decided the same bill that they piloted and passed, they no longer support the regulation of the casino industry. So we decided to bring it to a head today, and I've called this press conference to deal with any questions that the media may have.
Before we proceed with the questions, I just want to remind members of the media to please use the raise hand feature for your question to be acknowledged. I have a question from Carla Bridgelal, Newsday. Hello, Carla.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can see you, but we could hear you.
Good afternoon. All right, so, sir, I guess the obvious question is what now? What's the plan now with this bill?
Well, the fact of the matter is that, as I indicated, the bill that we laid in 2016 was a carbon copy of the bill passed by the UNC in the House of Representatives in 2015 and would have been passed in the Senate if the Parliament was not dissolved to make way for the 2015 election. So it is logical to assume that if a political party drafts a bill, debates it, passes it in one house, then goes to the other house to introduce it and goes through the procedures to pass it, and the process is interrupted by elections. It is logical to assume that when another government comes in and they'll approve legislation, they already voted for it. So when they told us they want to send this thing to a joint select committee, we couldn't understand because it had already been the subject of an extensive consultation by them and preparation of a bill by them. So we've worked with them. You know, sometimes these things work out. Quite often they don't with this particular UNC opposition. We've worked with them on this very complex piece of legislation using both local and international experts. We've met with every stakeholder with them. They have gone through every clause with us. And we decided we have to put it to the vote. We just can't leave it there on the older paper. I read out the history of this thing. It was first introduced in 1999 and lapsed. Then brought back in 2001 and lapsed. And so it has been going over and over and over from 1999 to now. You're talking 20 years. So that we never expected them to reject their own bill, which they've done. So that what we're going to do now, since this bill requires a special majority, we're going to have to come with some other regulation of the sector that would not be as powerful as this bill, but certainly we'll be able to close some of the loopholes that currently exist in terms of tax evasion and that sort of thing.
So that's my next question. Is there any sort of amendment or adjustment?
Well, we can't deal with.
So it won't be so it won't necessarily need a special majority.
We can't deal with,
More regulated.
yeah, Carla, I'm trying to answer you. We can't deal with this bill because they have refused to support this bill. But we can deal with the legislation that currently regulates the sector, the weak legislation, such as private members club legislation and so on. And we can put teeth into that. But what best practice tells you all over the world, for those who have traveled, I mean, I am not a casino man. I don't think I've ever set foot in a casino in my life. But I mean, if you read what takes place in Las Vegas and London and so on, all of these casino industries are regulated by a gambling commission. Because you need to have a special purpose regulatory body to control this industry because of the amount of money involved and because of the dangers and pitfalls of criminal activity and money laundering and so on. So that this was the whole purpose of this bill, and it was, as I said, their bill. You need a commission with power, and that is why this had to have a special majority. And what that power would do would keep undesirables out, keep criminals out of this industry. We will now have to go to a less powerful form of legislative amendment and see what can be done to the Members Club Act to see how one can address the problems of criminality and money laundering and so on.
Thank you. We have a next question from Otto Carrington.
Yes.
Hello, Otto. Otto, are you with us?
Yes, I'm right here. Hello, Minister.
I'm here.
Nice, perfect. Minister, tell me something. What is the current situation with the stakeholders? Because I know that stakeholders would have been part of this, especially Joint Select Committee. We're talking about 20 years of our legislation that has been going around. How does this affect the industry? Could you quantify, if in regards with no regulations, what kind of money we could be losing as a country, and what kind of things we will not be able to track down, especially when you deal with money laundering and also terrorist funding and stuff like that?
The estimate of money loss is $500 million a year. That's the estimate of money loss, because this is a $16 billion industry. $16 billion, and it's unregulated. So the money being lost to taxpayers is about $500 million. So there's a lot of money at stake. So that could be the motivation for persons not wanting to support the legislation. The only way to deal with the issues of tax evasion and white collar crime is that we'll have to go and look at other legislation. But without a special majority, no authority or body would have the teeth to deal with this problem. You need to have this special majority because you need to regulate it to an extent where you keep people out. You don't want the criminals to run this industry.
Tell me something, Minister. What are stakeholders saying? Especially, I know that they would have been part of this before under the last regime. What are stakeholders saying now? Because there's no regulation. Because some of them would abide with what is stipulated now. But what would they say? Are they upset as what is actually happening now?
I can't.
And they are supporting supporting the direction that you are in.
I cannot say. But what I would say, because you see there's a lot of intimidation in this sector, a lot of intimidation. I mean, I had persons coming to protest outside my home, and I mean, I don't think they wanted to do that. I think the persons who came were encouraged to do that. In fact, I understand they were brought there in maxi taxis. But the point is that no reasonable person involved in this sector would want to avoid regulation. If you have proper regulation, you can have growth. It becomes completely illegal. Right now, all of these clubs are operating under the radar. They're doing things that really they should not be doing. But because the law is so weak, some can get away with it, some can't. In every country in the world, there is regulation of casino gambling. I suspect that the reasonable ones would endorse regulation. It's only people who want to avoid paying taxes and want to engage in criminal activities that would be opposed to this.
Thank you, Otto. Just to remind members of the media to use the raise hand feature if you have any further questions. you, Minister. At this point, we have no questions. I don't know if you want to continue.
So no more questions from the media, even though we have all those media people online. Okay, well, thank you very much. And we will be saying some more about this in the weeks ahead to give a proper explanation of exactly what this legislation was going to do to deal with the well-known problems in this sector of vulnerable people being exploited, employees not being allowed to join trade unions, for example, persons not being paid proper wages, being made to work long hours without proper compensation, and the whole question of leakage of foreign exchange and evasion of taxes, and this huge industry that's taking place without any proper regulation whatsoever. So there'll be much more communication in the weeks ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you.